PowerPoint, which I can eventually share with you, has a lot of slides, but we won't see all of the slides. We'll see what we can do in the time which we have. The idea for today's lecture is to go beyond the discourse on rights, which we started to see last week. So just as a reminder, we spoke about a series of rights mentioned in Catholic social teaching in the documents which we mentioned. Some of the documents are not very well known, but a number of these rights are then referred to in some of the major encyclicals. Right to have a nationality, right of refugees and forced migrants to asylum, right to migrate in and out of a country, right to basic freedoms in one's homeland, right to adequate employment in one's homeland, the right of migrants to receive equal pay for equal work, the right to be helped to integrate in a new country, the right to family reunification, the right of host communities and migrants to live in a cohesive and well-ordered society, the right of polities to limit brain drain and capital flight, the right of polities to protect their citizens from harmful persons and harmful objects, sovereignty. Okay, obviously, the whole debate today is that not everything is possible. So not all rights are absolute. We need to find a way of balancing in a world which has limited resources, the different rights of the different people, and so we've seen the different groups of rights and the reasons which the church provides, which different dicasteries and the popes offer to support these rights. I mean, a lot of these texts were written in the 1960s and 70s. There was in general a sense after the boom of the Second World War that many countries needed workers, foreign workers, and there was a sense of being honest, saying we need so many workers, we'll have a worker program. Some tried temporary worker programs, some discover that workers which work well often stay because the employers want to keep them. Then obviously, what does it mean to integrate people? And that becomes more of an issue. But until the stagflation crisis in the late 70s and 80s, I mean, most industrialized countries had accepted this idea that like you need migrant workers for a modern economy, and you need to find a way to integrate them and to treat them decently, and they have rights. So like there was a convention which was drafted in the 70s and 80s for the rights of migrant workers. Most people at the time were in agreement with it, but as time passed, like a lot of the wealthier nations started to hold out, and this convention ended up, I mean, it was ratified by a number of countries which don't traditionally welcome a lot of migrant workers, and the countries who traditionally welcome a lot of migrant workers didn't ratify or sign or ratify this convention, and so it remained a sort of dead convention, because I mean, it's the church tried to push this in many ways diplomatically. There are documents saying this is a great instrument for the rights of migrant workers. Countries should sign it and so on, but a lot of countries said, no, it's not popular, we won't sign it. Then we had different initiatives, but like the latest initiative which we mentioned are the global compacts, which are non-binding compacts, but at least countries in 2018 tried to set some standards on respecting the rights of migrant workers and the rights of asylum seekers. And and the church pushed a lot, and we mentioned the formation of the Migrants and Refugees section at the dicastery for promoting integral human development. as the church and then the Pope spoke on many occasions in 2018 to promote the four verbs, which we mentioned. And this was in view of promoting these global compacts and having global compacts which bring which take into account all of this discourse on the rights of migrants and people involved in the migration phenomenon, and which again, I mean, most of this thought comes from the 1960s and the 1970s, but Pope Francis sort of wrote it out with a very eloquent way, also with gestures, with going to places, bringing people from Lesbos, visiting borders, and so on. So he wanted this to be on the news, because if I were to speak about this to most people, most Catholics, they have no idea that the church holds these positions on the rights of migrants, and that it has held them since many years, more than 50 years. So where are we now? Well, rights imply duties, and this is clear for Catholics, and rights are not absolute. Sorry, I'm missing something. I'm trying to find it. Sorry, give me a second. I have a slide which I can't find immediately. Okay. All right. I think I deleted a slide. No, here. So, so the first thing to remember is that rights imply duties, and rights are not absolute. I mean, even when we speak about the right to life, there are moments where we also have a right to defend ourselves. For example, legitimate self-defense, or a war which is justified to defend oneself from aggression. So rights are to be understood within a cohesive structure of rights, ordered by principles, and rights are to be understood linked to correspective virtues, to corresponding virtues. And Catholic social teaching helps us to understand how to balance the system of rights by giving us a number of principles. Among the more the more important principles, obviously the whole notion rotates around the notion of common good, which we spoke about last week. Common good, which is both on the family and personal level, on the social national level, and on the international level. But then these principles help us to orient our understanding of rights and duties. So the universal destination of created goods, which also implies that we shouldn't exaggerate the value of private property and political sovereignty, because God created the world for everyone, those who are born in a poor country or poor neighborhood, and those who are born in a rich neighborhood. There is a value in borders, there is a value in private property, but this shouldn't become an absolute, and not used to systematically exclude people and keeping them poor. There is the principle of solidarity and the preferential option for the poor, which implies avoiding petty nationalism and safeguarding especially vulnerable foreign minors when you're speaking about child migrants, but also other people involved, especially vulnerable people in the migration phenomenon. and to offer hospitality and aid as necessary, not only in one's country, but remember, 85% of the people don't go far away from their own home countries, and they're hosted in relatively poor or middle-income countries. These countries cannot support the migrants, the refugees and asylum seekers and some of the vulnerable migrants unless they receive aid from international institutions. And from countries which finance those international institutions. We have a situation this year where many countries have decided not to fund a lot of international institutions anymore, in part because they want to grow their defense budgets, and they're taking out money from these budgets which went to help countries like Uganda, which support 1 million refugees. So, what will Uganda and these countries do when they cannot provide food and shelter for all of these people? Where will these people go? Okay, some people don't seem to want to think the consequences of stopping all of this aid money going to these countries. Subsidiarity, the respect for the agency. Here I'm speaking of post-pubescent minors, migrants, but also vulnerable migrants who may not have very high levels of education, but we still have to respect their ability to take decisions. And also for migrant communities, without micromanaging faith-based and civil society organizations accompanying them. We've had very heavy intervention in places like Italy of the government trying to control like NGOs saving people at sea. Priority of labor over capital, which John Paul II reminds us the importance that the worker is more important than the investment. Obviously, both are important, but if we can move jobs rather than workers, is better. But obviously, then sometimes we need workers to be in certain places. There are some jobs which cannot be nearshored or offshored or outsourced. And so how can we do these jobs, bringing in the people who need to do them in a way which is responsible and respectful of their talents and respectful of their work, their rights. And then there is the whole reflection on structural evil and structures of evil in our world. So part of the problem is because we have strong interests in keeping people subjugated or in a situation of vulnerability so that they can be exploited. There are big interests, big money going into this, and people using the media to try to sometimes convince other poor people that there is a fight, there is a conflict between poor people, and the poor people have to choose sides. And actually, this is mostly a narrative, a myth of poor autochthonous workers, their jobs being taken away supposedly by poor migrant workers. Often the game is to hide the fact that there are people who are trying to give this impression because they have very strong economic vested interests in hiding the fact that they want this competition in order to be able to exploit people. So we need to we need to remember, and this is theology, that there is evil in our world, and there is evil in a lot of things, a lot of systems, so we have to be always careful and wary that where is this coming from? Who is saying this? Why are they saying this? Because a lot of discourses are also dictated by greed and by fear. So I'll go a bit back and add a little piece to this. So good. So we spoke about rights, we spoke about the duties linked to the rights, and we spoke about principles which help us understand which duties and which rights should be enjoyed and should be observed by whom. And obviously, there is no magical formula. I mean, these principles which we've just mentioned need to be applied in a prudential way by people who also have knowledge. So politicians who represent the people involved and who are informed by science, and who seek to balance out the different rights and duties in a way which is fair. It is not something which we can easily do. I mean, there are certain things which are so egregiously wrong that we can understand that some laws are absolutely immoral. But other laws may have articles which are good and articles which go against the rights of migrants in an unjust way. We do not respect these principles which we've mentioned. And we also have a duty as citizens to fight for laws which are just. Obviously, however, we are in a situation where speaking of duties, especially, is tricky because voters and governments in certain regions, especially ones with few migrants, are not receptive to this ethics approach. They're due to fear, prejudice, and sensationalist media coverage of immigrant crime and social tensions. Data and scientific analysis are sometimes falsified, distorted, and reinterpreted creatively by think tanks and social media influencers to create doubt and forge a negative narrative and to block effective legal reforms in favor of migrants' rights. And citizens in burdened migrant receiving neighborhoods are tired of being told to do their duty, to welcome migrants, to treat them well, to respect their rights. They feel, I mean, a lot of the places where migrants go to live are neighborhoods, counties, municipalities, which already have a lot of problems. They have been neglected. I mean, and this is why the migrants go to live there because, I mean, the housing is cheap. This is the housing they can afford. But often it's because there's been a chronic problem in the government, in the management of the resources. I mean, in some places there's been gerrymandering and playing with the borders in order to cut off rich neighborhoods and leave poor neighborhoods in a municipality which basically is constantly underfunded and cannot support the schools, the roads, and the services which is supposed to provide. So there has been a lot of games even played with the people in these neighborhoods in the past to deprive them of their rights, to not provide adequate funding to like neighborhoods where there are a lot of children and there's need of more schools, neighborhoods where there are a lot of people with health problems and they need better clinics. And obviously, if every county and every municipality should find the money for its own programs, and there's no solidarity between municipalities and no help from the federal government or from the national government, then you're going to have pockets of chronic poverty. And these are the places where housing is available for cheap, and this is the places where the migrants will go. And these people who have been living there for generations, when they see the migrants, they see themselves even more as victims of this arrival of migrants who already come to a neighborhood which is dysfunctional, which is underfunded, or a lot of services are not working properly, and they see these as competitors. So I'd like to open up a little bit our debate. So there are a number of studies done by organizations like More in Common. This is just one study done in Britain. They have studies done in many countries, and they also have updated studies like every 6 months or so. But in 2020, they sort of disaggregated the British voter population into these groups: progressive activists, civic pragmatists, disengaged battlers, established liberals, loyal nationalists, disengaged traditionalists, backbone conservatives. You can go and read about this, but this is a way where sociologists divide populations according to the messaging that they feel comfortable listening to. And obviously, when you're involved in the media, when you're a good communicator, you want to target each one of these groups with a message which they understand and they can find it's receivable. So there are obviously some of these groups, like the progressive activists, which, okay, here is 13% in 2020 in Britain. If you were to make the discourse which we've just made on rights of migrants, they'll be very happy and they would be in agreement. Most of the others, well, they would have different levels of resistance, and some would go directly hostile to any discourse of migrants' rights. Okay, I mean, if you can maybe present it in a way which touches on issues which they care about very strongly, like national identity, like tradition, like so there are different values which these different groups care about, and if like changing the laws for immigration in a way which is positive can be presented as a way of promoting something they care about, then they would probably listen. Otherwise, they would probably not listen to what you have to say and they would switch off. I mean, again, today with social media, a lot of these groups are risk being closed in social media groups, which are echo chambers, and they have difficulty dialoguing and listening to the positions of others. So this is what we have to deal with. I mean, it's not easy to present, and we're not there to present a message which is sweetened and regurgitated according to the ideology of each of these groups. We have a discourse to make about the good and the bad, the right and the wrong, and that is what Christian ethics is about. But I mean, even from a point of view of sociology, I mean, there are data on migration, data on migrant economics, on migrant labor, and that's the truth. I mean, you cannot sort of bend the truth to make these people more interested in what you have to say. But the problem is that, like a lot of what Hein de Haas was saying about, I mean, the myths are there because these groups won't listen to anything which challenges their view. I mean, some of these people have very hard time listening to things which doesn't fit their worldview and their sense of how things are and how things should be. I'll add to this a little bit of social psychology. So there have been a number of studies in recent years on misinformation in the media and especially in the social media. and why this misinformation can be so powerful. I mean, this goes from, I mean, some of the first studies were done in the late 80s and the beginning of the 90s. There was the debate, obviously, on the weapons of mass destructions, which were not found by the Bush administration in Iraq, and like the different justification which people gave themselves to say, no, but they have been, they must, Saddam Hussein must have had weapons of mass destruction. It's not possible that the government is lying to us, and so on. And obviously this goes on with COVID, with different legal proposals in different countries, and the way that public opinion was manipulated sometimes by misinformation to vote in a certain way or in another way. With, for example, the whole Cambridge Analytica debate in 2016 and so on. So let's go through this quickly. There are cognitive biases. So confirmation bias is that individuals tend to seek out evidence that supports a preferred narrative. I like to think that migrants are a good thing for my country. I think that asylum seekers are all criminals. Okay, so what supports this idea? Whatever evidence I can gather, but I will accept. Any contrary evidence I tend to ignore or downgrade. Non-confirmation bias. Individuals tend to uncritically accept favorable arguments, evidence, and closely scrutinize opposing arguments and evidence. So if someone tells me, yeah, you're right, the migrants are bad, then I don't really examine why they're saying this. Yeah, they're right because they agree with me. But if someone tells me, no, migrants actually can be a positive influence in our neighborhood, well, I'm going to ask 100 questions trying to demolish that kind of claim because it goes against what I feel strongly about. So it's not possible that there are data. Where did the data come from? How many? What was the sampling? Who was the guys who financed the data? And so on. So I'm going to ask all sorts of questions to doubt and question the validity of those arguments. Trust heuristics. Individuals tend to interpret the confidence or certainty with which information is rhetorically expressed as a signal of expertise or scientific expertise or accuracy. So when a politician says, "This is the truth, I'm telling you this, you have to believe it," people say yes. And when a scientist says, "Well, we have a 99.9% certainty from 10,000 studies that actually migration doesn't have a very strong negative influence on the economy." The question, why is it not 100%? Why is it not more studies? Why is it almost certain? Obviously, this is how scientists express themselves. There's no absolute, I mean, scientists based on empirical results always gives their results as a percentage of certainty, never speaks of absolute certainty. But actually, for a scientist, expressing doubt in the results is a hallmark of scientific rigor and honesty. But obviously, this is seen by some people as not good enough, not true enough, not accurate enough. Power of strong emotions. Individuals tend to accept and spread claims capable of inducing strong emotions. False information often spreads quickly when linked to such emotions. Easing negative emotions in crisis situations. Individuals tend to believe false claims capable of easing negative emotions. Fear, anxiety, sadness, doubt. In crisis situations where many people seek information primarily as a source of relief and only secondarily as a source of truth. Tell me what I want to hear. I don't want to hear any more sad news. If you have sad news, please shut up. If you have things which can give me a hope, then yes, I want to listen. But often this becomes an issue when dealing with difficult situations and complex situations. Distrust of institutions. There are debates where people, individuals, present knowledge as new. I mean, they tend to discount the relevance of knowledge based on past and corroborated research when exposed to powerful messaging that exclusively highlights the novel and unprecedented elements of the phenomenon. As Heinda has said, like this idea that everybody's spreading that like this is unprecedented, this level of migration, we've never had it in the past. Well, we've had it in the 1800s, we've had it in the beginning of 1900s, we had it after the Second World War, we had it after the fall of the Berlin Wall. What are we talking about? This has happened in the past. We have all of the data, we've analyzed it, we have 150 years of studies on migration. Why are you telling us that this is completely unprecedented and we cannot trust the science based on past knowledge? But this is what the game is played. So the weight of institutional history, individuals belonging to communities with past experiences of discrimination, deception, or manipulation, real or perceived by certain authorities or institutions, tend to be suspicious of fact-checking claims by such institutions or ones which appears similar. Obviously, we've had this for the COVID communities, people who have been manipulated by past by companies like Pfizer in the past, but this is also the case with immigrant receiving communities who have had complex relationships with institutions and with academics. Rootedness of prejudice. Individuals with prejudice are deeply rooted and entwined with personal values and worldviews, tend to strongly suspect or interpret factual information touching on topics or coming from persons that activate these practices. So if I have a prejudice against you and you are telling me a certain thing, then obviously that is going to have an impact on whether I believe you or not. Cognitive dissonance. Individuals tend to experience cognitive dissonance when exposed to information that goes against their values or worldview, especially when this worldview is linked to their social identity or to a belonging in ideological groups. They are tempted to play with facts or doubt the reliability of sources to regain this harmony, that there's nothing wrong with me, with my worldview, with my group, with my political party, with my theology. I don't have to rethink anything. It's the information which is wrong. So no information will ever touch me and make me reflect on the things which I hold as true. I mean, even within the Catholic Church, what I believe to be the true teaching of the Pope against the false teaching of the false popes. We've had this with Pope Francis. So people who have sort of said, well, Pope Francis is not the true Pope, and Pope John Paul II is the true Pope. But okay, Pope John Paul II had the same position on migration, just like Pope Francis. So, but obviously, I mean, this is some of the games which some people play in their heads. Social media has particular issues. So the absence of information gatekeepers, the priority of monetization, which sometimes makes algorithms tell you whatever you want to hear as long as you stick and watch more adverts and spend more time. Echo chamber effect. So providing answers and links based almost solely on past behaviors and expressed interest. Obviously, there are debates to be had on all of this, but this is something to keep in mind when moving on to the proposal, which I'm going to make and try not to. So we have like another 20 minutes, and we're going to speak a bit about virtue ethics. So serene dialogue and empathy are needed to see migrant workers as brothers and sisters, as bearers of rights, and fear and prejudice are not easily overcome by stating scientific facts and listing the rights of people perceived as competitors or enemies. We need to build kinship bonds with the stranger through virtuous practices. So here we use a number of things. Kinship or kinship building, obviously in English, kinship is understood more traditionally as biological, but we can widen the concept as something to build brotherhood, this sisterhood, this fraternity, this camaraderie, this convivencia, this social amity, this civic friendship. This is the topic of Pope Francis' social encyclical Fratelli Tutti. Kinship building is a form of solidarity which goes beyond hospitality or just a love of humankind. It involves building deep relationships of respect and social amity with people who live near us, whose presence among us is slated to become permanent, and whose agency we cherish and promote to the point of leading them to effectively become our equals and our partners within a society of equals. Moving from gratuitous hospitality to social amity or to kinship building means moving from temporary relationships of dependence to permanent ones of interdependence. We depend on the migrants depend on us. And actually, at some point, they stop being migrants, they become us. And this means also overcoming stereotypes, which portraying migrants as needy, helpless victims. They're not. I mean, this is very clear. Fratelli Tutti puts indirectly in chapter 2, the Bible, the example of the Good Samaritan. The migrant is the one which is there to help us. I mean, it doesn't mean that he's always the hero and the Superman, but the migrant is not necessarily. I mean, there are moments where migrants may be needy, may be vulnerable, but doesn't mean that they're going to remain that way. And obviously, some people realize this even when they're hostile, because they know that migrants can become powerful elements, can destabilize the politics of a country, can hurt others because they have agency. They're not little kids who are helpless. But how can we make that agency something positive, something constructive? So in order to frame this, let us say something about solidarity. Solidarity, in common parlance, is community spirit, mutual attachment, social cooperation, charity, brotherly love, love for humanity. We use this word meaning different things. In some philosophical and theological authors, solidarity is the modern term for fraternity or brotherhood. Obviously, in English, there's the question of the gendered element of these words, but also fraternity and brotherhood have certain historical implications, and traditionally they're very linked to religion, like religious fraternities or the Muslim Brotherhood or different Christian brotherhoods. So there's an idea of using this word solidarity, which is a mutual attachment between individuals. But solidarity can be both something existing, which can be observed. So this group of people are already solidary. They're already a functioning, cohesive group. So there is solidarity in this group. But this is the fact. But solidarity is also a reality yet to be created and reinforced. So it's a task, not just a fact. So it can be understood as an ideal, as a norm in ethics, in prescriptive speech. So etymology is this idea of a contract made with a group of people in which each member of the group undertakes to fulfill the entire contractual obligation alone, or repay the entire amount of the loan, even if all of the others were to default or renege on the contract. So we are 4 people. If all of the others go bankrupt, I will pay the loan for myself and the 4 other people. It's not something easy. It's a big challenge. It's a trust which I have that they will be responsible and that they won't go bankrupt. But if actually they do, I will take care of their debt, and they will take care of my debt if I go bankrupt. this is where solidarity comes from. So it's this idea of obligatio solidum from Latin. Uh, Today we have these uses of the word solidarity, which are more rhetorical. If you don't do this, you're not in solidarity with this group. It's exhortative. It's used to encourage an audience to act in a certain way. Now, in one of his first visits, Pope Francis in 2013, his speech at Centro Astalli, he teaches us how to decline and make concrete the concept of solidarity, often used in ecclesial and political discourse. Now, this translation is a bit bit literal from Italian. You might find a different translation online in English, but okay. In these years, the Centro Astalli has made a journey. At the beginning, it offered first reception services, a soup kitchen, a bed, legal aid. Then it learned to accompany people in their search for work and social inclusion. And so it also proposed cultural activities to help grow a culture of hospitality, a culture of encounter and solidarity, starting from the protection of human rights. Hospitality alone is not enough. It is not enough to give a sandwich if it is not accompanied by the possibility of learning to walk on one's own legs. Charity that leaves the poor as they are is not enough. True mercy, the one that God gives us and teaches us, asks for justice, asks that the poor find a way to no longer be poor. It asks us, the church, us, the city of Rome, the institutions. It asks that no one should ever need again a soup kitchen, a makeshift lodging, a legal assistance service to see their right to live and work, to be a full person recognized. And then he has these the questions and the witnesses from some of the refugees, and one of them is Adam, and he said, "We refugees have the duty to do our best to be integrated in Italy." And he says, "Well, it's a duty, but it's a right," says Pope Francis. Integration. And Carol said, "The Syrians in Europe feel their great responsibility of not being a burden. We want to feel an active part of the new society." And yes, this is a duty, but it's also a right, says Pope Francis, to be an active part of a new society. Here, this responsibility is the ethical basis, is the strength to build together. How do we accompany this journey? For the whole church, it is important that the welcome of the poor and the promotion of justice are not entrusted only to specialists, but are a concern of all pastoral care, of the formation of future priests and religious, normal commitment of all parishes, movements, and ecclesial groups in particular. And this is important, and I say it here from the heart. I would also like to invite Religious Institute to read the sign of the times seriously and responsibly. The Lord calls us to live with more courage and generosity, the welcome, in communities, in homes, in empty convents. And obviously, this started in 2003, a whole movement, which, I mean, different reactions, but a lot of things was done, even by universities, by convents, by different groups, by parishes. So this idea of going beyond hospitality towards integration, I mean, he continues to develop this. And another moment which is important is this Abu Dhabi moment with Grand Imam Al-Tayyib. We appeal to intellectuals, philosophers, men of religion, artists, media workers, men of culture in every part of the world, so that they may rediscover the values of peace, justice, goodness, beauty, human brotherhood, and common coexistence, to confirm the importance of these values as an anchor of salvation for all, and to try to spread them everywhere. It's interesting that he's not speaking to lawyers to make new laws. I mean, sure, certainly there is need of laws to protect the rights of different people. But we need to change the imagination. We need artists. We need religion. We need liturgies. We need culture. We need media workers in order to go beyond these blockages which we've seen with all of the cognitive dissonance and cognitive blockages which happen when dealing with issues which are unpleasant or which we find hard to swallow. Dialogue, understanding the diffusion of a culture of tolerance, acceptance of others, and coexistence among human beings would contribute significantly to reducing many economic, social, political, and environmental problems that besiege a large part of the human race. And then he speaks of citizenship. The concept of citizenship is based on the equality of rights and duties under whose shadow all enjoy justice. Now, remember that this is Abu Dhabi, no? And remember that the Gulf countries have a huge immigrant population. I guess you heard also from someone who shared about this. So obviously there's an idea of having these people working, but obviously the idea of rights is not always respected and understood as in some of the Western democracies. And the idea of citizenship sometimes is a big issue in these countries. So again, even have a difficulty, like think of all the Palestinians in some of these Gulf countries. And so we've had a case in this time when this came out, like where Saudi Arabia gave citizenship to an AI robot, but you have 60% of your population who are migrants have no access to citizenship. Okay. The concept of citizenship is based on the equality of rights and duties under whose shadow all enjoy justice. For this reason, it is necessary to work to establish in our societies the concept of full citizenship and renounce discriminatory use of the term minorities, which carries with it the seeds of feeling isolated and inferiority. It prepares the ground for hostility and discord and takes away the conquests and religious and civil rights of some citizens by discriminating against them. Obviously, this applies to Christians living in Gulf countries, but also to Muslims living in traditionally Christian or Christian majority countries. With whom are we to stand in solidarity? With people who are similar to us or with people who are different? Solidarity with brothers, with citizens, with other Christians or other members of our religion, or with strangers? Can we really be in solidarity with both? How can this not become a contradiction? Human groups like to have some sort of limitation, so to close themselves in some way. So traditionally, we've had cosmopolitan religious traditions like Christianity and the Muslim Ummah, where the solidarity is seen as a solidarity between members of the same religion. It is not confined by borders, but obviously, I mean, you have communities of other religions sometimes living next door, and there's not much solidarity with those other neighbors who are not members of the same religion. So you have ghettos of different types, including Christians in some of the in the Ottoman Empire, for example. So modern political traditions basically are based on the idea of spatial solidarity. People who are confined in a certain spatial borders are to consider themselves brothers. And those who don't have citizenship, who live in a different polity on the other side of the border, we can be nice to them, but they're not part of us. So obviously, immigration, which doesn't have a path to citizenship, in some way has an issue with both of these two models. We spoke of solidarity as having different levels. So this is something which Pope Francis, in his talk at Centro Stalli in 2013 starts distinguishes. So there's a distinction between solidarity as hospitality or solidarity as philanthropy, the spirit of humanity, and the idea that there are people on the other side of the world who are suffering from a tsunami, and I'm going to send some aid. There are people who are dying of hunger. There's a famine. I'm going to send some food through an association who might, or through Miseria, or through Caritas Internationalis, or through some other institution. But then there is the fact of having people who are there in the street next to me, and can I build something more than, can I do something more than just welcome them and giving them something to eat and giving them a place of shelter? Can I build society with them? Can I be fraternal, and can I go beyond treating them as someone who is there today and who should be leaving tomorrow when the situation at home will stop? Obviously, here we are in, let's think about again the Ukrainians. So certainly Ukrainians have been displaced for many years now, since the start of this last war. I mean, some of them we hope will return, but to remain on the level of providing some hospitality or to send some help to the Ukraine as philanthropy, without starting to integrate. And then we'll see. I mean, some of them will still go back, some will remain, but this is one thing which obviously it's a dimension you have to take into account when people start to spend 4 or 5 years in a country. We cannot continue to consider them as beggars, as people who have to line up at a soup kitchen every day because they don't have a right to find a job and start supporting themselves, for example. So this is, sorry, here, I didn't add extra. So these different levels are important. Let me move on a little bit. So these slides you will be able to see later. So different hospitality can be seen as a duty, and obviously there are duties like in the Kew Gardens principles. The case of Kew Gardens in 1964, Kitty Genovese was stabbed to death in Kew Gardens, New York. There were 38 people nearby who saw the crime, and it seems that nobody did anything, or not even called the police. Well, maybe she was a woman, she was an immigrant, or seen as an immigrant. So this created a whole debate beyond the question of whether, I mean, the real facts of the issue, the fact that so many people were there and saw her being stabbed and seemingly did nothing. This means that hospitality is not always an optional act of kindness. There are cases when it is necessary to welcome and protect the foreigner in situations of life-threatening danger. And some of the criteria are that we have a positive ethical responsibility to intervene. If there's a critical need to intervene, the subject is physically close to the need, the subject is able to respond, and the subject is probably the last instance that can give help in that situation. So this is to remind that hospitality is not when I feel like it, or in order to be a good person because I'm a good-hearted person sometimes, and well, there's no real obligation to be hospitable. In some cases, yes, there are forms of hospitality which are required, but also hospitality is a virtue. And virtues are habits, which therefore a competence regarding the implementation of the good. It's not automatic, not habit like. Obviously, habit is sometimes used in English to indicate a dependency or an addiction, but this is something which we have to train to be able to be good at. And sometimes it can be hard to be hospitable. It's costly. Sometimes it becomes more stable, easier, and even enjoyable. So hospitality is more about, we speak about the hospitality industry of welcoming people for Christmas, but are we ready to welcome foreigners? Like in the Gospel of this rich man who does the feast, and like the guests don't come, and he goes and invites everybody else. Should we welcome people through an institution by giving money or volunteering at an institution? Should I welcome them at my own home? There are different levels and types of this hospitality. It can be strategic. I help an important person so that he can give me a promotion, or he can do me a favor. It can be an egalitarian type of reciprocity. Okay, I invite you, you invite me, we're good friends. Or it could be uncomfortable or altruistic, where people are invited who cannot recompense us, and the hospitality could sometimes be risky. This uncomfortable hospitality is something which at times with foreigners we need to engage in. All right, so this is again something which is characteristic of the first Christian communities. There are sociological and historical studies which argue that Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire because Christians were especially hospitable, especially to people who are victims of natural disasters. Institutionalization of hospitality. Obviously, uncomfortable hospitality is institutionalized in the church, and because a certain professionalism is useful and it offers a certain security to people involved. But then there's the risk of completely losing personal contact with the person, becoming cold and aseptic. Within our Christian traditions, we have ambiguities. So we have monastic communities where there was hospitality given to poor people and hospitality given to rich people, and there were different places to welcome rich people and to welcome poor people in the monasteries. Non-Christians were not usually considered as people to whom a monastery should welcome, because they're not Jesus Christ, who is the host, was being received. There's also the whole debate in Lutheranism against not being hospitable towards the Jews because they were not hospitable towards Christians and towards Jesus. So hospitality can be challenging, and I wanted to speak of two models of practicing hospitality. Then I'll just read a few quotes from Fratelli Tutti, and we'll conclude. So the model of Abraham, who is in Mamre and who welcomes these messengers who are presence of God. Obviously, there's a reference in the letter to the Hebrew of people welcoming strangers and actually discovering that they had welcomed God they had welcomed Christ in welcoming strangers. But so it's someone who has a place of his own and he welcomes people into this space. But there is also a traveling type of hospitality, the Good Samaritan, someone who meets people on the road, welcomes them on the road, takes them to the inn, which he doesn't own, leaves them there, then comes back and pay. Both of these things are possible, and we have different models. So, for example, Jesuit Refugee Service has programs like the Welcome Program in France, where families welcome refugees. And this has been done with Ukrainian refugees, also by many other associations and groups. Another model is this experience which I've had in Mexico, where a lot of migrants pass under this bridge, and the parishes go there and they welcome the people under the bridge. So they set up the chairs, they give the food, there's mass, there's a doctor who helps them, takes care of their feet. So they have a rotation of 17 parishes, and every day there's one parish which goes under this bridge where migrants gather and they offer hospitality. So let us conclude with some citations of Fratelli Tutti, which can be stimuli for our reflection. Obviously, the position of Pope Francis is that hospitality is important, but the end game here is for some migrants to become part of the social fabric of our societies, that they become brothers and sisters, that they be integrated and not be seen as foreigners. And I mean, certainly hospitality remains something which is internal to a society which is integrated. But it's not a hospitality seen as towards someone who's outside our group. So, nor can I reduce, so he speaks, I cannot reduce my life to relationship with a small group, even my own family. I cannot know myself apart from a broader network of relationships, including those that have preceded me and shaped my entire life. So I come from something which is bigger than me, and my family, my distant relatives also, are a network of relationships which I had. Most people have migration history in their family history. Love then is more than just a series of benevolent actions. Only by cultivating this way of relating to one another will we make possible a social friendship that excludes no one and a fraternity that is open to all. Love also impels us towards universal communion. So what is proposing? It's proposing something which is a far cry from the false universalism of those who constantly travel abroad because they cannot tolerate or love their own people. Those who look down on their own people tend to create within society categories of first and second class, people of greater and lesser dignity, people enjoying greater and fewer rights. In this way, they deny that there is room for everybody. I mean, there are cosmopolitans who have a snobbish attitude towards people in their own country who don't travel so much or not so cosmopolitan, whom they see as bigoted and close-minded. But this again becomes a form of bigotry. I'm certainly not proposing an authoritarian and abstract universalism devised or planned by a small group and presented as an ideal for the sake of leveling, dominating, and plundering. One model of globalization, in fact, consciously aims at a one-dimensional uniformity and seeks to eliminate all differences and traditions in a superficial quest for unity. This is not the fraternity which Pope Francis is talking about. It's a fraternity where people can maintain differences and identities which are not all uniform. We live in a world where social groups continuously appear and grow. They cling to identity which separates them from others, which tend to organize themselves in such a way as to prevent any foreign presence that could disturb this identity and this self-defensive and self-referential organization. As the word neighbor loses all meaning and only the word member acquires meaning, the one who is associated for certain interests. There's behind this a whole article by Paul Ricoeur, which is very interesting. Fraternity is not only the result of conditions of respect for individual liberties, not even of a certain regulated equality, although these are conditions of possibility. They're not enough for it to derive from them as a necessary result. Fraternity has something positive to offer to freedom and equality. I will stop there. Well, maybe just this last text, which I will mention. No one then can remain excluded because of his or her place of birth, much less because of privileges enjoyed by others who are born in lands of greater opportunity. The limits and borders of individual states cannot stand in the way of this. Ideally, unnecessary migration ought to be avoided. This entails creating in countries of origin the conditions needed for a dignified life and integral development. Yet, until substantial progress is made in achieving this goal, we are obliged to respect the right of all individuals to find a place that meets their basic needs and those of their families, and where they can find personal fulfillment. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you for listening. Obviously, there are other things in the PowerPoint which you may see later when you receive the PowerPoint. But I'd like you to have some time for questions and debate.